Hello, welcome back to my channel. This is episode 5 where I read from my book Chaos and Creation, The Coming of Darkness. Chapter 3, House and Hearthstone. As Arthur and Warder slowly made their way back down the valley, Harold Wolfhart stood watching the rising sun from his bedchamber window. A challenging day lay ahead. From across the land, the older lords, with their warriors and chattels, were converging upon Longvale as they had done for generations. Like salmon returning to their spawning ground, the older lords came to this ancient seat of power. Here they discussed the lofty affairs of the Elder Guard, under the watchful eye of the imperial administration and its irresistible army of occupation. In the distance, Lord Wolfhart caught sight of his daughter Arwen returning from the dairy, accompanied by Dirk, a member of the household staff, who was stumbling under the weight of 2 heavy pails of steaming fresh milk. Harold continued to watch as Arwen, appearing to grow impatient, sent Dirk back to help with the preparations of the feast and picked up the pails of milk herself. Harold smiled as he watched her. It was the dawn of her womanhood, and she was a strong lass like her mother. Then, "Harold?" It was Gwendolen, his beloved wife, calling him from the kitchen. "It's time for you to come and get your breakfast, lord of my love." Harold came downstairs and walked across the kitchen towards the large hearth. Stone flags salvaged from the ancient ruins that lay scattered around the lower valley made up the kitchen floor. Other parts of the kitchen also filtered reclaimed stone from the same ruins. His favourite was the fireplace. Here, above the large open range, sat a magnificent stone mantelpiece, bearing an ancient inscription that no one had yet been able to decipher. In the fireplace, a large blackened iron kettle now simmered gently. On this particular morning, an equally large pot of porridge oats bubbled alongside it. Harold stretched his arms and yawned as he walked towards the open fire to peer into the pot, pulling a face at the sight of the steaming porridge. "No bacon, then?" Gwendolen was reassuring. "That will set you up a treat for the day ahead, and preserve your appetite for the feast tonight." Without answering, Harold scratched himself and pulled at his woolen breeches before plunging a stubby finger into the pot. As he returned the loaded finger to his mouth, Gwendolen called out in anger and alarm, "It's not ready yet." She was cross. "Good," Harold said, grimacing, "because if it was, I wouldn't be eating it." He could appear very intimidating even to those that knew him, but not to Gwendolen. She bustled over and pushed him aside. She was no frail creature, standing just slightly taller than her husband. "Look," she said as she spooned the contents of her bowl into the steaming pot. "Butter, honey, and," she reached into an earthenware pot, "a pinch of salt is what it needs. You'll see." The oaken breakfast table was comfortingly large and heavily marked from use. Harold sat himself down noisily at the end of it and looked around. "Where is everybody?" "They will be here soon shortly. John says Arthur has gone up into the High Valley and won't be back until later. The others are all out attending to their chores." "Up in the High Valley? What for?" Gwendolen reached for a towel and wiped her hands. "He didn't say. You know how he's been lately. I thought perhaps you'd sent him up there." "Well, I didn't, and he's got more than enough to be doing down here." "I know. I'm so worried about him. He seems burdened. Perhaps you could talk to Warder about it. Something's troubling him." They looked at each other and Harold shook his head. "He never used to drink. He said it helped him." Gwendolen frowned. "Helped him? What in the name of Rowena is happening to him?" "Arthur. He was so good." Harold took his wife's hand and smiled reassuringly. "I'll talk to Warder when I get the chance. I'm sure he'll be able to help." Gwendolen smiled and nodded her head slowly before changing the subject. "Here, have some breakfast." As Gwendolen spoke, she ladled the bowl of steaming porridge out in front of him and placed a large lump of yellow butter in the middle to melt. "Any more honey, my sweet?" Harold inquired with mock affection. "You know where it is as well as I do," Gwendolen replied. Harold blustered. "In the name of Rowena, woman, is it too much for a man to ask?" As he did so, Gwendolen banged a large earthenware pot of honey onto the table, just out of his reach. "There," she said. And don't use our blessed mother's name in vain. Who do you think has been working day and night making arrangements and preparing for the feast day?" Harold growled and pulled his bowl towards him, just as the kitchen door exploded open, allowing two large boys and one breathless young woman to tumble in. "Ah, just in time. Would one of you pass me the honey?" Gwendolen was outraged. "What in the name of Rowena? What do you all think you're doing?" Harold smiled to himself. "What were you saying about taking Our Lady's name in vain?" Gwendolen scowled at him and then returned her attention to the new objects of her wrath. "Sit down, the lot of you." As they removed their muddy boots and began to seat themselves at the kitchen table, Arwen passed the honey to her father. "We were running away from that John. He said that he didn't care who we were, he would set about us with a stick." "What?" Gwendolen wiped her hands on her apron. "John was chasing you with a stick? Timber, explain, please." Timber, the third eldest of the Wolfhart offspring, looked at his brother and sister, who were struggling to contain their mirth. Then, before he could explain, Hubert, the youngest, let out a snorting noise that caused a plume of glistening mucus to blow out of his nose and across the kitchen table. As it did so, a look of horror came over his face, and they all fell into stunned silence. "Hubert, clean that up." Harold had broken the momentary silence. "The rest of you, settle down and eat your breakfast." Arwen began to laugh, and then Gwendolen followed suit. Finally, Lord Wolfhart laughed too. The House of Wolfhart. After breakfast, Harold and Gwendolen sat down by the fireplace. Both had dedicated themselves to building the reputation of the House of Wolfhart, a reputation of honesty and integrity that underpinned the Wolfhart bloodmark. They both knew that only a king could unite the older lords, and that only a claim by bloodmark could herald a legitimate claim to the throne. Timing was the key. They despised the Atarian regime and its representatives, particularly Tabor, the fat Sumerian prophet who would be taking advantage of Wolfhart's hospitality that evening. Just like all Atarians, he had grown fat off the back of the good men and women of the older guard. The time for change was drawing near. Gwendolen looked at Harold, who was prodding the fire with an iron poker. "The time draws near, old man." Harold quietly replaced the poker on its stand. Nodding his head, he looked into the fire as he spoke. "The land is abundant. The bellies of our good men and women are full. There is loyalty and contentment across the Older Guard. I believe the older lords are united in their desire for change." Gwendolen continued to gaze at the side of her husband's head, as if trying to read his mind. Harold turned to look at his wife. A warm orange glow bathed both their faces. "Tonight, my love, I will assert my claim to the throne by bloodmark. The older lords are aware of my righteous intentions." Gwendolen smiled and nodded. "There have been calls for you to make the claim." Harold reached out and took Gwendolen's hand. "Then now is the time, if Rowena wills it." The timing of the Older Lord's council was no accident. The harvest had been reaped, and the livestock had been counted. Tabor had come to assess the levy due to the Empire at the time when the land was at its most productive. The older lords had found this imposition increasingly hard to bear. For her part, Gwendolen had been adept at obscuring details of the productivity of the family estate. She resented paying the Atarian Geld. They all did, but Tabor and his predecessors had played the elder lords well, whispering in their ears, making promises to privilege their houses to the detriment of others. Thus, while the older lords were united in the hatred of the Atarian Empire, they were more often divided by politics and self-interest. So it was that Gwendolen had come to be seen as a champion against the imposition of Atarian administration. A champion that wielded considerable influence over her husband and the Oldermark, and those older lords attending the council would do well to remember it. Preparations for the feast. Timber and Arwen were herding tugs for the auction due to take place the day after the council lords' meeting, when many of the lords would want to return to their guard with new bloodstock. The Wolfhart tugs were renowned as the best in the Alderland, and as such were highly prized. It had been hard work, but they were equal to it. Indeed, Arwen was a natural, using just a voice and a firm manner. She was better at handling the unruly tugs than her brothers. She would spend all her time with them if she could. Her mother had other ideas. Her mother had other ideas. Arwen was a rich prize, the daughter of a wealthy and powerful man, perhaps soon to become king. She would soon be a woman, and there would be many suitors, some of whom would be attending the gathering, some of whom would be looking to pledge their avowed intent. Only an alderman from good stock would do. If she were to marry, she would require the skills of a woman, an alderwoman. Arwen could hear her mother calling. She had been called back to the kitchen to help. She had delayed for as long as she could, but Gwendolen had persisted. As the light began to fade, she could see her brothers through the kitchen window, hard at work in the main enclosure, laying down hay for the tugs. Both boys were shrouded in billowing cloud of steam as the late sun shone through the cold air onto their hot backs. Arwen went out to call them, her breath freezing in the cold air. "Hooby, Hooby, Hooby." She was enjoying the voluminous plumes of steam as she called out, "Hooby," when Hubert appeared suddenly at her side. "Who? Oh!" "What?" he said, looking both faintly amused and mildly irritated. "Oh, Mother says, can you fetch the meat for the roasting?" "Why can't you?" Hubert was irritated when his mother appeared to see what all the noise was about. "Ma'am, can't she do it? She's just as strong as me. Stronger and faster," Arwen protested as Gwendolen ushered her through the door. "Let's have no more of this nonsense," Gwendolen called back. "Get on with it, Hubert Wolfhart, and get Arthur to help you." Hubert followed them into the kitchen. "Arthur's up in the High Valley, remember?" "Then get Timber to help." Gwendolen Wolfhart was not a woman to be trifled with. Hubert looked serious. "Mother, Timber and me are really up against it at the moment. Couldn't Arwen go and get John to fetch it over if she can't do it herself?" "I can do it, Hubert. Just Mum won't let me." Gwendolen considered for a moment. The point was a fair one. "Actually, that's a good idea, Hubie. Arwen, you heard your brother. Get off and find John." Arwen looked horrified. "What? Oh, Ma'am, he's too, he teases me." Gwendolen turned back into the house. "Just do it, Arwen." Before Arwen could protest, her mother called out from the kitchen, "Now, if you please." John was busy loading up the cart with haunches of venison and boar in anticipation of orders from the kitchen. Earlier that morning he had spotted Hubert and Timber teasing the ram, so he had chased them off. To the boys and John it was more of a game. John knew full well that these days he probably couldn't master more than one of the boys at once. Even so, they respected him and knew they would be in trouble if John reported them to their father. Arwen, on the other hand, wasn't so sure. She was almost a woman and had mixed feelings about John. When he chased her, she would be thrilled, overcome by a mixture of fear and anticipation of what he might do if he caught her. For his part, John had been preoccupied with thoughts of how Arwen was turning into a handsome and capable young woman when he heard her call. Turning towards her, he couldn't resist a sly smile. Arwen kept her distance. "Ma says, can you bring the meat for tonight to the kitchen?" John pretended not to hear. "I'm sorry, Arwen, what did you say? Come a bit closer, for goodness sake. Don't stand over there just hollering." Arwen froze with indecision. What if he grabbed her? She wasn't sure how she felt about the idea. She had seen him looking. "Mum said, can you—" "I can't hear you," John interrupted, appearing impatient. "Arwen, it's no good. You'll have to come closer." You can hear me. You're just messing with me." She took several paces towards him. "Mum says can—" "I heard you." Ha 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 ha. John began to laugh and whoop as he made to grab Arwen. Arwen screamed hysterically and punched him in the chest and then the head before running away as fast as she could. As she ran, she could hear John's laughter, and she began to laugh herself before stopping and turning round. "You sod! You turnip head!" Then she sped off again back to the safety of the kitchen as fast as her long legs could carry her. "He's coming, ma'am!" Arwen burst breathlessly into the kitchen, her chest heaving as she pressed her back against the door. "Thank you, Arwen." Gwendolen smothered a smile and shook her head. "Now go and wash your hands. You can help Ubi with the baking." Arwen protested. "Oh, Mum, I wanted to go up to the main hall with you and help with the arranging and such." Do as I ask, please, Arwen. Ubi, as soon as Arwen is done here, send her along to the main hall, please. Ubi winked mischievously at Arwen, just as a wagon pulled by a large tug arrived outside with helpers from the local village. Distracted, Gwendolen left the warmth of the kitchen and called out as they began to climb down from the wagon. You lot, mind you don't go empty-handed. Unload the cart for John Goodfellow and take that meat straight to the main hall, if you please. Timber and Hubert were also on hand to help, and they were in playful mood. Won't they be missing you at the Foghorn tonight, John? Yes, Timber, happen they might, but don't you trouble yourself worrying about my personal affairs. Here, catch. John picked up a carcass of a large boar and tossed it to the young men, who both reached out to catch it at the same time, causing them to bang their heads together and drop it on the floor. As they laughed and rubbed their sore heads, Gwendolen suddenly appeared from behind the cart. What on earth are you two playing at? That meat needs to be eaten. Get it up off the floor and get it on the spit. It must be ready in time for the council. Then she turned her attention to John. And you, can't you keep an eye on these two? John struggled not to laugh. Yes, ma'am, I'll do my best. Old friends. As Harold gazed up towards the high valley, he was reassured by the sound of Gwendolen's voice busily giving out orders in the yard. He looked forward to the coming winter night, sitting before a roaring fire, taking counsel and listening to Warder's tales of distant lands. He recalled how, with each passing year, for as long as he could remember, he and his family looked forward to Warder's arrival. This is how it was for his father and his father before him, before the occupation. Now it was his turn, with his wonderful wife Gwendolen and their dear children safely warmed by the fire as it burned in its ancient stone hearth. Harold's thoughts were interrupted by the sight of a handsome white tug preceded by two hounds, some way in the distance. It would be Arthur and what appeared to be a passenger seated behind him. Just then, Gwendolen arrived next to him. You look miles away, old man. Oh, look, that must be Arthur, back from the High Valley. Is that somebody with him? As the great tug with its passengers drew closer, Harold began to broaden his grin. Looks like he's got Warder with him, my love. Gwendolen looked concerned. Oh my, I hope he doesn't cast a spell over me. Harold turned to her, frowning deeply. Don't be daft, you know that's not his way. Gwendolen chuckled. I know, old man, I was just teasing. With that, Harold reached down and grabbed a handful of his wife's ample bottom. I know you were, you vixen. Ow! Gwendolen yelped before pulling free and frantically looking around to see if anyone was watching. That hurt you, old tug shagger. Harold tipped back his head and laughed out loud before looking at Gwendolen with a wicked glint in his eye. Do you fancy a quick cuddle before they get here? At first, Gwendolen looked mortified. Then, in a moment, her expression changed. Best be quick, then. They'll be here in no time. That's all right. Harold grabbed her by the hand and led her back into the house. I won't take long. Warder's return. As the big tug closed in on the homestead, closely followed by Rafe and Sissy, Warder and Arthur continued in conversation. You must be patient, Arthur. I know it's not what you wanted to hear, but soon your family will need you. The Aldermark and beyond will need you. Arthur looked alarmed. Need me? I don't know how. Why? Warder could see Arthur was struggling to make sense of what was happening to him. I know it's hard. Your nightmares, they are real. Arthur looked away. I'm afraid. It's getting worse. Warder tried to reassure him. I will explain more. There is still so much I do not know, but I will soon. Try and be patient. Then you will speak to Pa? He doesn't understand. I think he's ashamed of me. Warder nodded. Yes, he worries. They both do. When the time comes, he will understand. How long, Warder? How long before the time comes? Warder hesitated. He knew that events were soon to take place that could make all Arthur's worst fears come true. Soon it will come to light, when the time is right. They continued in silence until finally reaching the courtyard, where Arthur brought their tug to a halt. He was more relaxed, appearing to be satisfied that Warder was at least ready to listen, perhaps to support him, when the time was right. As they were dismounting, the hounds began to bark and wag their tails excitedly. Warder smiled broadly as Harold and Gwendolen approached them. Greetings, noble lord, heir to the throne of the Aldermark, and Lady Gwendolen, a true queen in waiting. He bowed in affectionate deference, and as he straightened up, Harold reached out and embraced him. Warder, friend of the Aldermark, it's so good to see you again. He looked towards Arthur. You've been a while. What have you been up to up there? Gwendolen pushed past and took hold of Warder, giving him a huge hug. Taking a moment to reacquaint herself with his exotic appearance, she took a deep breath and leaned back to look at him. She still found the tattoos on his face to be a distraction at best, as he seemed to change with the seasons, but she approved of his close-cut beard and neatly plaited hair. This seemed appropriate for a man of his stature. Lovely to see you again, dearest Warder. Warder gently removed himself from Gwendolen's warm embrace. It's lovely to see you both. I hope I find you both happy and well. You do. Harold cast a worried glance toward Arthur. Indeed you do. I trust you two are well? I am, Warder replied. Now how about a nice hot brew while Arthur and I report in? Harold had detected that all was not as it should be. Report in? Arthur? Gwendolen intervened. For goodness sake, all of you, get into the kitchen, then you can talk. I'll ask Ubi to brew up for us. Arthur cast a glance at Warder as he sat himself down. I saw someone up there, Pa. Harold leaned forward in his chair. What? Are you sure? If I catch any trespassers on our land, I'll... Did you set the hounds on them? Arthur hesitated. Well, no, I wasn't sure. We didn't see anyone as such, more a fleeting glimpse of something. Arthur turned to Warder, who had removed his heavy boots and was now massaging his feet. Arthur is quite right. There was someone up there. Warder could see that Arthur was taken aback by his certainty. Sorry, Arthur, I didn't tell you at the time because they were too far away and too dangerous to apprehend. Gwendolen was surprised. Too dangerous? You let them get away? Arthur's initial surprise turned to relief. I could have run right into them. Then he became thoughtful. Odd that Sissy and Rafe didn't get after them. Just as well, Warder continued. They may have killed your fine hounds. I just got a glimpse of them as they crested the high ridge. There was no way we could have caught them. Besides, I didn't want them to know we'd seen them. Harold looked perplexed. You didn't want them to know? All three sat down and looked at Warder as they waited for an explanation. Warder had noticed the door was slightly ajar, so he motioned with his head towards Harold. Holding his fingers to his lips, he stood and reached out, opening the door quickly. There was nobody there, but Ubi happily pouring boiling water into a large earthenware pot. Harold turned to Gwendolen and tilted his head towards Arthur. Gwen nodded as Warder returned to his seat. Perhaps you could find John and give him a hand. Arthur immediately bridled and turned to Warder. There, you see, how am I supposed to feel? He made to get up and leave, but Warder put his hand on his shoulder. Steady, Arthur, calm yourself. Your mother is concerned for you. Arthur twisted out from under Warder's gentle grip, but remained seated as Harold continued. Warder is right, Arthur. Your mother worries about you. We worry about you. You've not been yourself lately. It's time you learned to be, well, more comfortable in your own skin. Gwendolen leaned forward and placed her hand on Arthur's knee. The meeting tonight will herald an important dawn in our family's history, Arthur. I'm worried we will need to be equal to the task. Arthur stood up and made to leave. You're worried I will let you down. Warder took hold of him by the wrist. Young lord, please sit down. Arthur hesitated. He thought about tearing himself away from Warder's grip, but somehow he resisted and sank back down into his seat. Harold watched him carefully as Gwendolen continued. You must trust us. Arthur didn't answer. We will help you, but tonight you will need to play your part. Arthur looked steadily at them both before making his reply. Then his shoulders appeared to relax. Aye, I will, Ma. I will be ready. Harold nodded. Good, thank you, Arthur. Then, keen to return to the matter in hand, he turned to Warder. Why was it you felt these men should not know they had been seen? They were spies. Spies? Gwendolen stood up quickly as if she was about to chase off a fox from the kitchen coop. Warder pointed to the door. Please, Gwen, keep your voice down. Gwendolen sank back into her seat. I'm sorry. Outlaws are one thing. Atarian spies are quite another. What were they doing, sneaking around on our land? Warder shrugged his shoulders. First, we cannot be sure they were here in the service of the Empire. Second, I'm not sure what they were doing. What I do know is that if they thought we had seen them, they would likely be more wary should they return. Harold and Gwendolen nodded as Warder continued. Do any of you know for any reason why they might be poking around up in the High Valley? While his parents pondered the question, Arthur wondered, were they looking for something they had lost? He noticed Warder was looking at him. He became uncomfortable and quickly decided to keep the thought to himself. Harold suggested, Atarian patrols sometimes snoop around the upper valley looking for outlaws. Apart from that, I've never seen the like hereabouts before. What do you think, Gwen? Gwen shrugged. I've no idea, but I can tell you I'm not happy about it. You and Arthur should get back up there and have a look as soon as you get the chance. Warder had pulled his boots back on and was silent for a few moments. I think all will be revealed in good time. Perhaps for now you should focus on the arrival of the Elder Lords and the Atarian Prophet. Until then, I think we'll just have to wait and see. That's all we can do. In the meantime, I would advise we keep this to ourselves. If they are in the employ of the Empire, it's unlikely they pose a threat to honest good men and women. At that moment, Ubi bustled into the room. My lords, my lady, the fat prophet has arrived, and he's brought a guest. So that's the end of chapter 3. I hope you enjoyed it. Please like and subscribe if you're interested in hearing the rest of the book. And I'll look forward to reading to you again soon. Also, any comments or questions would be gratefully received, and I'd be happy to respond to any thoughts you may have. Bye for now.